Anyway, this morning's presentation will be on the 580-101 interchange, northbound 101, 580 eastbound interchange project. That Transportation Authority of Marin is the lead agency, I believe, in planning this project, and in association with both Caltrans, the City of San Rafael, the City of Larkspur. And this morning we have Molly Graham, who's the outreach coordinator for TAM, and Dan Cherrier, who's the primary project manager for this project. And they're going to do a presentation, and then we have some time for questions and answers afterwards. I encourage you to save your questions for the end, and we look forward to a robust Q&A. Molly, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for having us, and Kate for being on our committee and inviting us. So as mentioned, I'm joined by Dan Cherrier. He is actually he's gonna run the PowerPoint, and I'll do the introduction, and he will go through more of the technical aspects. So I see Dan's already on getting the presentation. But thanks again for having TAM come and present to your committee. This is a project that's been a long time, and it's in the early planning phases. So Dan, I think if you could go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this is in the early planning phases. It's before the environmental process. And the primary goals of the project are to reduce congestion on US 101 and local streets. The issue now is that there is no direct connection between northbound 101 and eastbound 580. That's what this project is proposing to do. So currently what people do, if you're on northbound 101 and you want to go to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge or eastbound 580, you either take Sir Francis Drake exit and you go through those local lights and the local roads, or you proceed to the Bellam Francisco exit, which causes a significant backup on 101, and you go through the Bellam and back onto 580. So what that does do, it causes congestion on our local streets as well as the backup on 101 that I mentioned. So this project also proposes improvements to Bellam Blvd for bicycle, pedestrian, and transit access. So the next slide, please. Yeah, this project has been under consideration for a long time. This is, Richmond-San Rafael Bridge is a toll bridge. So this is one of the only toll bridges in the Bay Area that doesn't have a freeway to freeway connection. There was funding secured both in our local tax measure as well as for regional measure 3. So the upcoming work, as I mentioned, is to identify alternatives and do a very thorough environmental analysis. We are even pre that phase, and doing outreach and talking to folks before that is important, and we will continue the outreach as we go into the environmental process. So sorry, Dan, if you don't mind, I just backing up. Yeah, so we have engaged a stakeholder working group. Kate, thank you for being part of that. And Linda Jackson, I see that you're here as well. So I'll go into more details with that. But we're working with Caltrans, and also part of the project is to develop a conceptual kind of high level design work for the opposite connection, which also doesn't exist, the westbound 580 coming into Marin, and then southbound 101. All right, Dan. Thank you. So this is the targeted project schedule. As mentioned, we are currently in the project development phase. So we're working on consensus building, and then environmental scoping, which is kind of the term to kick off the environmental process. That would occur later this year. And once that's finished, you determine a preferred alternative, so the design that would be built. And then ultimately, this final design and construction, the box in green. If all funding occurs and we, get the necessary approvals, we would begin construction in 2026. So these are long, big projects, and they take some effort. So 2026 to 2028 for construction with funding available. So there are 4 project development committees that are helping TAM with, the development of this project. We have an ad hoc committee, which consists of our 4 TAM board members. We also have an agency executive committee that consists of most of the agencies you can see listed on the right here: Caltrans, MTC, Contra Costa is also involved, and then of course the county, San Rafael and Larkspur. We have another technical committee that also is those agency representatives from the technical standpoint. And then we have our stakeholder working group that I mentioned earlier. And the next slide, I think, goes through the list of the 20, there's 20 representatives on that. So that committee has been very actively involved. We've had 3 committee meetings thus far. We have another one coming up. But as you can see from this list, and we will be providing this presentation to you so you could see that. But you could see Linda and Kate and a lot of other probably very familiar names that are on this list, representing a diverse group of Marin residents and commuters and business interests. Next. So this is the general schedule that we're working on. As you could do, we're developing the preliminary alternatives. There's a technical document for Caltrans called the PID, the project initiation document. And then all of these, the stakeholder working groups, the ad hoc, all these committees work in concert to provide us input. And so there is a feedback loop as we develop this project. So as you could see with the stakeholder working group, we've had 3 thus far. There's another one scheduled for January 20th. That will be, these are public meetings, so that'll be posted on our website. And there's likely to be another, so we've in the spring 2021, we expect at least one more. So this consensus building goes on throughout. And all of these committees, there's feedback and input that helps us develop the project. And I think, so this is where you could see the activity that's happened this year in 2020. Of course, we've had a very interesting 2020, and our first stakeholder working group meeting was actually supposed to be in March or April. And of course, we had to fall back and do this in the method that we're doing it now, which is on Zoom. But everybody seems to have adapted. We're looking forward to the days when we can look across the table at one another. But as it is, we've been able to do a lot. Most of this activity has all been remote, what we've all been living through. So as we've had all our technical meetings and executive meetings, but also coming out to groups like this is extraordinarily important. And so you could see all the lists of the activities we've been involved in here. Next slide. So the primary elements that we look at with the project and people provide input on are the design speed, which is this is a tight area. So it's hard to get the standard design speed. So there's a few that are, some are 50 and some are 35 miles an hour. Traffic and congestion is, of course, a major project consideration. Environmental impacts will be thoroughly analyzed in the environmental document. So that's where you do your disclosures and your mitigation and you get input. So of course, air quality, GHG emissions, noise and habitat for the San Francisco Bay, visual impacts. And then I'm just to the other side, neighborhood connectivity and community impacts are also very important. Sea level rise, consideration, cost, property impacts, these are all going to be thoroughly disclosed and discussed in the environmental document. and then bike pedestrian transit access, as well as equity. Construction projects or transportation projects go through communities, and making sure that there's an equitable outcome for the community is very important as well. So I mentioned a little bit of this earlier. The project funding, Regional Measure 3 was voted on throughout the 9-county Bay Area for toll bridges to provide additional funding for specific projects, and this is one of them. So $135 million was approved in that. And unfortunately, Regional Measure 3 is held up in litigation right now. It's with the California Supreme Court awaiting hearing, and ideally all that money, which is being collected and held in escrow, ideally that court case is resolved in the near future, and we can have that money, the $135 million, to contribute to this project. There's also local funding from our local sales tax, which was also voter approved, and that's about $16.5 million for our local efforts and interests. And I think from here, do I turn it over to Dan? Yes, now we get to I call this the spaghetti map, but the alternatives that we have, there are 7 that are currently being considered. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks everybody again.
Thank you,
Dan,
Molly.
take it away.
Okay, thank you, Molly. Welcome everybody. Yeah, we currently have 7 alternatives, and we're thinking of maybe even adding another one that's a slight modification of one of them. But there's, on the right side of your screen, there is 2 alternatives up on the hill, 1A and 1B. We're going to show some slides in a minute that show these more up close. I'm just trying to get you a kind of a spotting map here. Alternative 2, which is the next one to the left, it's to the east of Bellam there. I'm not sure if my arrow shows on this thing, but that goes down, it crosses Anderson and goes down Sims Avenue. Alternative 5, if we're going right to left here, goes pretty much through the parking lot of the Marin Square Shopping Center. Then you have alternatives 3A and 3B, which is that one that kind of looks like a Y further to the left. 3A goes over the Bellam off-ramp, and 3B unfortunately has to close the Bellam off-ramp from I-580. And alternative 4, we call the swing out option. That's our minimal right-of-way impact alternative. So let's go through those in a little more close-up detail. Alternative 1A starts off at the top of Cal Park Hill. It goes across the hillside. It has to cross over a roadway that accesses the hillside. That's anything in orange is a bridge structure. Anything in green is on the ground. Obviously, a lot of deep cuts and deep fills here. It goes to the east of the sanitation district, and then goes on to I-580 after that. One thing about all the 7 alternatives that we'll be discussing here is they all have an auxiliary lane on I-580 from wherever the alternative joins 580 to join the current auxiliary lane that comes on from Sir Francis Drake to approach the bridge. That's the right lane as it approaches the bridge all the way onto the bridge. That means that the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp will revert to being a standard on-ramp with a normal merge. So this is 1A. This structure, this one orange structure over here on the left, as you can see down in the profile view, is a 60 feet from the bottom of the road. From the top of the roadway surface to the bottom of the structure of the bridge, and then a 20-foot high bridge over Anderson. What you're seeing here for the cuts and fills, we have exaggerated the vertical scale so you can actually see the vertical scale. So it's not quite these huge mountains that you're seeing there. It's more of a rolling ridges and all. So here is we got this. Here is the that arrow to the right shows where that first bridge structure is, and then it winds behind MSS, which is the Garbarino recycling facility, and this is what like the right half of it will look like. Alternative B is further up the hillside. We did this for a couple of reasons. One was to see if we went further up the hillside, would it have less of an impact on the MSS facility? We don't want to go all the way to the top of the hillside because then it can be viewed from the residences that are on the opposite side. And then it goes on the other side, as you can see, of the Marin Sanitation District. It now goes on the west side. So it'll have less impact on their operations. It will touch down to 580, unfortunately, right where the Sir Francis Drake on-ramp is right now, and off-ramp. So it will necessitate rebuilding both of those ramp structures, and we'll have to realign slightly how Anderson comes into Sir Francis Drake. The actual structure over that roadway on the far left there, right after it starts, is a little less high because you're further up the hill. You don't have to go between. You don't have to span as much height between the ridges because you're further up the ridge. When I say it does have less impact on MSS. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. It starts in exactly the same place. Here is a photograph of kind of how it looks, and we'll go from there. Let's see. This is how both of them take off from I-580. This is northbound Highway 101. This is northbound Highway 101. And they would both pretty much start in the same location. But this kind of gives an idea of how they would take off. Both of these are the highest cost of all the alternatives. And they probably have the largest environmental impacts because of the habitat and species and other resources that are up here on the hillside. So moving along to alternative 2, this is the one that goes down Sim Street. It leaves 101 right before the current Skyway structure, and it crosses over Anderson, then it crosses over the bike path that's there currently, as well as the train tracks. It crosses over Anderson, then it starts coming down along Sim Street. Of all of them, this is the one that causes the highest right-of-way impacts because there's a building structure right over here by 580, right where it changes from orange to green, and we would have to buy that entire structure. It has a pretty high bridge where it goes over Anderson. It's 40 feet in the air, so obviously a lot of visual impacts here. Plus, it's right on the side of Sim Street, so you can see that coming all the way down. It does have a long structure section, pretty much all the way from before the train tracks to practically where it is going to go to I-580. Here's a photograph of a rendering of it crossing the train tracks and the bike path before Anderson is off there to the right. Like I say, it's pretty high where it crosses over Anderson. The next view. Next alternative is 3A. Call this the low speed A. The reason we call it low speed is as you're coming down the hill here, the space you have to get turned around gets tighter and tighter, so the design speed gets lower. Well, we have a table after all of these that'll show how the design speed works, but basically it goes just east of the current Bellam Blvd off-ramp. You see that the Bellam Blvd off-ramp off to the far left. What would happen is you'd have a double lane exit. All these have a double lane exit. And then the Bellam Blvd off-ramp would go off to the left of the direct connector shortly after the gore point. It does have an odd profile because it has to get high enough to go over the I-580 exit to Bellam. So the highest part of the structure is actually where it crosses the I-580 off-ramp, not where it's crossing Bellam itself. So it gets kind of a weird profile in that it raises up fairly quickly and then starts dropping down the rest of the way, including the part over Bellam. Like I said, one thing is an auxiliary lane, no matter which one we start, happens at wherever the touchdown is. So in this case, that third lane going eastbound I-580 would start at the moment this will touch down. And it does have a non-standard feature in that I-580, I'm sorry, Bellam Blvd comes off on the left of the ramp. So, and the structure over the Bellam Blvd off ramp, as you can see, is about 16 feet over that structure, which is the minimum required by highway standards. One thing you will notice is an extra set of orange over here, and we'll get to this in a minute, but no matter which option we're doing, the Bellam Blvd undercrossing structure, where I-580 goes over Bellam, is going to be replaced to match the, if you remember, TAM about 12 years ago replaced the westbound structure, and we were able to get rid of the column in the middle and widen out this structure. So no matter which alternative we do, it will have that one thing done, even if it's up on the hillside. So here's kind of a picture of what that would look like. You can see the Bellam Blvd off-ramp going to the left of the direct connector. And you can see that there are some right-of-way impacts. That part in green, that little grassy area, that is currently owned by Caltrans and leased to some businesses that are back there at the end of the Gary Place roadway. I think there's a place that makes masonry tile and a couple other businesses that would be impacted. Alternative 3B is the same thing, but it doesn't have nearly the profile. It actually will cross Bellam Blvd at the same height as the Bellam Blvd undercrossing is right now. And it does have the Bellam Blvd off-ramp on the standard right side of the direct connector. So basically all of the Bellam Blvd loop that is there right now would cease to exist. However, it does necessitate closing the Bellam Blvd off-ramp from I-580, which will mean that people that need to access anything to the opposite side of the I-580 freeway, including all the people that live in the canal area, would have to exit at Francisco Boulevard west, which is the next exit up from I-580 going southbound, come down to Anderson, make a left turn, and then make a left turn on Bellam. This is something that we've heard from the community so far that is just not going to work for them. We're also looking at a possible revision to this where we can maintain the I-580 off-ramp, and actually the I-580 off-ramp goes over this structure. It has a separate area where it will touch Bellam Blvd, see if we can still keep elements of this this alternative. So here's what that would look like. You can see there's almost no structure involved here at all. The only structure is where it crosses over Bellam Blvd here at the same height as the existing structures. This is actually the lowest cost alternative. The 135 million you saw that Molly referenced a few minutes ago for alternative 3A, that's the one that goes over the Bellam Blvd off-ramp. That is the 135 million one that we actually put into RM3, but that was just a placeholder at the time. It didn't necessarily mean that that's the one we were going to choose. We had to put something into the application for those funds. The last one more after this. Alternative 4 is the swing out option. This is the most structure intensive one. And it does have a little higher design speed. And the reason it was included is this is the one that does not impact right-of-way. You can see all these businesses here on Sims, Remain, the Marin Square structure, actual business is not impacted. These businesses leasing the area from Caltrans are not impacted. It goes more or less down an open marshy area here, but just to the other side of the railroad tracks. It goes over Francisco Boulevard West. Unfortunately, it does also have to close the I-580 off-ramp. And this is probably the one we've heard the most negativity about. It's one big concrete structure with pretty much some pretty high areas where it's crossing over 101. It has to cross over 101 twice. It's a big structure going down Francisco Boulevard West. I haven't heard a lot of good feedback on this, so much so that those what we showed you what it would look like with the visual simulation, those are very expensive. We decided not to do one for this one. So that takes us right to alternative 5, which is the what we call the medium speed. It leaves just at 101, just about the same place alternative 2 did, but instead of going down Sims, it has a more gradual curve that goes through the parking lot of Marin Square. So obviously it has some right-of-way impacts. It does miss the post office. It just clips one side of it, and it would not affect the Bellam Blvd ramps at all. They would be on a whole separate structure. It does get pretty high. Where it crosses Anderson, it's 43 feet, I think. And but we can maintain the Bellam Blvd off-ramp and all that. You notice in this one, even though it's not affected at all, we're still replacing the Bellam Blvd structure. So this is kind of what that would look like. You can see it going right through the Marin Square. So far, this one hasn't got a lot of positive feedback, but it hasn't got nearly the negativity that we had on alternative 4. Alternative 4, you can see it's pretty good in this picture. In the very bottom of this photograph, you can see this open area here. That's where the structure would have gone for alternative 4 and then gone down Francisco Boulevard West there on the far left side of the picture and then kind of crossed back over 101. So this is kind of all of the alternatives put together, all 7 of them. You can see that the only ones that meet the Caltrans standard for design speeds are at the top, but they're by far the most expensive. Alternatives 3B and 4 are the two that has to close the off-ramp from I-580 to Bellam Blvd. Alternative 4 was the one that had the minimal right-of-way impact, so most of that cost is due to the structure. For alternative 2, most of that cost is due to the right-of-way we would have to buy. Alternatives 1A and 1B are the ones that had the most environmental impacts, but of course, visually, alternative 2 has some very major visual impacts, and probably does this swing out, and I would say also the medium speed, the visual impacts are high too. Only 3A and 3B have minimal structures involved. Of course, 1A and 1B have somewhat minimal structures. So that's kind of a synopsis. Like I say, we only have the 135, and that's why we had done 3A as part of the RM3 application. If our process ends up with one of the more expensive ones, the schedule Molly's shown would probably have to be delayed a little bit while we seek out additional funding. We've taken all this out of here, but this is the travel time savings you would have. And let's see, it would be, it shows, one of our concerns when we first were doing this was, are we going to spend all this money and it's still quicker to go down Drake and people aren't going to use this thing? And we pretty much found out that if you go to 2040 modeling, that the Drake travel time is going to, or taking Bellam, is going to be around 15 minutes. But the direct connector, if you build the ones on the hillside, will be about a little over 5 minutes. And if we build the ones that are down towards Bellam, obviously it's the same to take Drake or Bellam, but that the direct connector will be 7.5 minutes, which is still a major time saving. So that concern was addressed. So one of the things Molly talked about is, no matter what we do, we want to make sure it does not impact the opposite direction. We don't have any money right now to build the other way, but we want to make sure that whatever we do, we can build the other direction. And this is showing that we can. This is alternative 3A, shown with a conceptual design for the opposite direction. One of the things, no matter what we do, is that the on-ramp for the other direction is going to be too close to the current Sir Francis Drake off-ramp. So we're going to have to actually braid those ramps to allow this traffic to merge and not get in the way that people are having to cross over to get this Sir Francis Drake. Obviously, this is years down the road. We don't have any plans or funds for this now. We have another alternative that would go with the ones up on the hillside as well. By the way, alternative 4, we cannot, also has a major problem in that we could not figure out a way to do the opposite direction. So alternative 4 is having a great deal of issues. I did mention the Bellam Blvd off-ramp. You can see in the picture inset to the lower right how it's a clear span now. That means it goes all the way from abutment to abutment without any kind of support in the middle. And also because of newer building techniques, we were able to push that abutment back, as you can see, compared to the other abutment, which is further down in that lower inset picture. And we would do the same thing on this project. That'll allow those two columns you see in the main picture that really don't allow San Rafael to come up with different ideas of how to apply solutions to the traffic. Also, we left that abutment on the lower right there, the near one, as a blank wall, and didn't put any kind of scalloping on it or anything, in case San Rafael one day would like to install some kind of mural there or something, and that possibility will still exist, but at a greater scale. The other thing we're kind of committing to, even though it's not necessarily tied into the project as much, this is part of that extra 16.5 million you saw in there, is to improve the bike and pedestrian access on Bellam between Anderson and Francisco Boulevard East. If you remember when we did the structure going the opposite direction over Bellam, the Bellam Boulevard eastbound undercrossing, we did significant improvements in sidewalk widening along Francisco Boulevard East down to Medway and along Bellam Boulevard down to Kerner. These would improve those same improvements and add additional areas for bikes as well. We have a few options right now: bikeways on both sides, bikeways on one side, or a separate structure over Bellam. I'm sorry, over I-580. So far, the bikeways on both sides are getting the most feedback of liking by the various groups. And, you know, Molly showed how many stakeholder working groups we've had, how many places we've gone to meet, quite a few. We've had, of course, our ESC and our TAC, and we've got tons of comments. But this slide is showing what some of those comments are that we're hearing kind of universally over and over again. And as I mentioned several times, the Bellam Boulevard closure is just not something that the community so far can get behind it all. The Bellam Boulevard off-ramp. Those improvements I just mentioned on, Bellam Boulevard, the bike and pedestrian improvements, as well as replacing the eastbound structure, have got a lot of good feedback. Some concerns, especially early on, that we weren't addressing equity, and we've taken some steps to kind of address that, make sure that the impacts of the local neighborhoods are better thought out. One thing I do want to point out, though, is we're early on. We haven't even started the normal process yet of where you would start a project like this. We're just getting early on feedback from everybody in the area to see what are some of the concerns and all, so we can best go through the Caltrans process and not go down and spend a lot of resources on an alternative that no one's going to want when we get it out of the other end of it.
Yeah.
Some of the property owners have been rightly concerned. MSS says that alternative 1A will impact their operations. That's Marin sanitary service, the recycling facility, and that there's some open space on the hillside they're concerned about with 1B, as well as City of San Rafael for part of it. And then the Marin Square, and we do have impact of that one whole office building down there at the end of Sims Avenue. So lots of concerns from some property owners, and we're taking all that under advisement. The other concern was that the really high cost of alternative 1A and 1B would mean that we would spend a great deal of time trying to find the money, and it may put off this project for a long time. And people, when we've said that we can open it as early as 2029, people seem to get really, behind that. It's a very aggressive schedule, and some people don't get a little concerned even at that seems to be taking a long, long time.
So Dan, just real quick to jump in, I think this is a good slide and probably a good place to jump. I just heard from Kate that it would be good for us to turn it over at this point,
okay.
But I think that was
actually the last slide.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
exactly.
I would love to get some feedback from attendees too. Thank you, Dan, for the great presentation.
All right.
As
Let me stop sharing here.
Okay, if you have a question, if you want to go to the participant section, you can raise your hand there, or you could just raise your hand in person on video. One question I wanted to ask you, Dan, is are the Bellam Blvd improvements part of the included in the funding from Measure AA and RM3? And also I was wondering if the Bellam improvements are going to be, can't remember if this was already mentioned or not, but whether the Bellam Blvd improvements are part of the environmental review of the project. Are the two projects going to be considered together or separately, both for funding and environmental review?
Yeah, it's all one big project, and it'll be one environmental document.
Okay.
It's just that if you're building something up on the hillside, replacing the Bellam Blvd structure doesn't seem to have much nexus, and we want to make sure that got included. So that's always been in our plan, even when we have talked in the RM, the three options, and the cost of that has always been part of the $135 million.
Okay, and the other question that I had was, what, in terms of the concerns that you've heard so far, what are the environmental issues that have been raised? Have you heard environmental issues raised about the marsh for alternative 4? Have there been technical studies on greenhouse gas emissions for the different design speeds and the different alternatives, and noise issues or anything like that? Are there technical studies underway right now prior to the environmental review? And what are you hearing about that?
We've just looked at it and say, hey, that might be an issue, but that's it. We won't start the environmental process till 2023. Oh, actually, maybe the end of 2022. And that's when we'll get into all that.
Okay. But the scoping comments...
We haven't even started the standard initiation documents at this stage. This is just to try to get some feedback that if everybody just doesn't like alternative 4, which, or whatever, let's just get it off the table and not give it any more credence, because if we take all of these into the process, we can't afford to do the studies for all of them. We don't have enough funding. So we need to, if there's alternatives out there that are just a no-go, that's what we're trying to work out at this stage.
And Kate, I think that's an important question and clarification, is that the technical studies, GHG and impacts, the visual impacts in any of the environmental specific technical studies are not yet underway. And so that is a separate process that will start at a different time. And right now we're just trying to do high level discussion on, is this a non-starter? And we have heard some of that, some of the major primary concerns. And of course, we've heard that there's environmental concerns with the, when there are more biological impacts So that helps us decide if something, needs to be carefully considered and later on, and if there's certain alternatives that shouldn't move forward because it's expensive to study all the alternatives and do the design work. So I don't know if that clarifies.
Does anybody else have a question? Ed, are you muted?
Yeah, I like those presentations with the simulated structures. It's great to see. To me, any on-ramp you have onto the proposed alternatives would create lane changes and also congestion. So the least amount of on-ramps, to me, is going to be the best within practicality is financing. But again, on-ramps create congestions and lane changes, which are problems. Thank you.
Yeah, like I said, no matter which one we did, it would have an auxiliary lane. And obviously, there are no off ramps until you get to Main Street down by San Quinn. That's the next off ramp for any of these. So, except for
on ramps, I was considering on ramps coming onto the structure.
Right, but the on ramps, there's no reason for people to change lanes with the auxiliary lane, except when they can. Normally, what you have is you worry about the merge. If you have an on-ramp coming on, then you have an off-ramp shortly after that. People have to merge across that. Mm-hmm. In this case, the two hillside options, yes, you might very well have that issue because you're coming on.
It costs, yeah.
And then the people have to come across those to get to the Main Street off-ramp. Fortunately, that's a very low volume ramp. But yes, those are certainly things that will be considered under traffic.
Thank you.
Rick, did you have a question? I couldn't read it.
You're muted. You're muted.
No, I was making an announcement. It's off topic, so I'll relax.
Cheryl, did you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I've heard of plans to replace the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. And I wonder if that is being a factor in this project or how it might impact the connector project.
Right, there is a study going on. It's underway to look at various options and look at the cost of maintaining existing structure versus the cost of a new structure. And the cost of a new structure is a huge number. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's well in the billions. So far, whatever that is, it's a very long horizon for time. And we have an existing issue now. So obviously the new structure, if there is a new structure, will try to tie in pretty much to the same start point at both ends and probably curve around or somehow the new one, even if there was a new structure. And that's a long ways from being chosen at this point. It may be more economical to maintain the existing structure.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, then I'm going to ask one more question. So I'm just wondering, from the timeline, Molly, it looks like preliminary engineering was originally planned to start. And so I'm wondering if there aren't some kind of studies going on to determine whether or not there would be a backup on further up on 101. You know how the backup getting off of Lucky Drive to go onto Sir Francis Drake to get on the highway. One of the concerns that came up during the stakeholder working group meeting was, have there been, as we're starting to look at the alternatives and the pros and cons of the alternatives, has there been are there studies about how that will change where the backup is on 101? If there would be a backup, say from the slower speed ones versus some of the other alternatives.
I think that the short answer is that there will be traffic studies that address kind of what the impacts of these alternatives would be. But that is a consideration of 101 as well. And let me know if I'm misspeaking, Dan, that those would be part of the traffic studies, the overall.
Yeah. And one thing that this will have any of these alternatives is a multi-lane ramp, multi-lane direct connector. So there'll be much more capacity than currently there is on either using Sir Francis Drake or Bellam. And of course, you won't have any of the traffic signals or anything like that. So our early thoughts are that it will have no impact to 101, and it probably help out 101 because we get some of the cars that are currently taking Drake and mixing in with the Lucky Drive on-ramp traffic there, and eliminate some of that traffic, and a lot of the backup for 101 north anyway is by the traffic getting on at Tamalpais and not necessarily exiting at Drake, so it shouldn't have that much impact at all.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions, anyone? Okay. Want to thank both Molly and Dan for taking time today to join us and to give us a presentation on the project. And hopefully as the process continues, we can circle back and MCL will be watching for when the notice of preparation of the environmental review. We'll likely want to include some scoping comment and suggestions on that process. And so we appreciate your presentation of the alternatives and